Before the meeting, I'm just going to go through the fire emergency drills. So, there are no planned fire drills, so if the alarm activates, please leave the building in an orderly fashion via your nearest fire exit, either through the main doors of the hall or the storeroom adjacent to the stage. The fire assembly point is the island in front of the main entrance to the building. Please do not delay your evacuation to collect any belongings. Please do not return to the building until given permission to do so by council staff. Please note that the meeting will be audio recorded. Please switch off mobile phones or turn them to silent. The toilets and hand washing facilities are available in the foyer area. Members of the public, whilst you are of course entitled to film or take photographs during this meeting, can I please emphasise to you that this should be done without disruption to the meeting and can only be done from a designated area in the public seating. Can I please therefore ask you to raise your hand clearly in the air if you wish to take photographs or film this evening. Thank you very much, and you're absolutely fine where you're sitting. Thank you. Members, there is a need to use microphones during the meeting. When I invite you to speak, please wait until there's a microphone in front of you before speaking, as microphones are needed for the hearing loop and for the audio recording. These are all switched on and ready for you to use to speak. You do not need to adjust them, as they will be unmuted by officers when you wish to speak. Please make sure that the microphone is close enough to your mouth before speaking and speak clearly. Members, voting will be done on a show of hands in line with the Constitution. I will ask for a show of hands for, then against recommendations, and will also ask for a show of hands for those wishing to abstain from voting. So, the meeting will now start. Agenda item 1, apologies for absence. Apologies have been received from Councillor Lambourne and Councillor Wilson. Also, Councillor Wilkinson. Have I any other apologies, please, members? And also Councillor Shop. Thank you, Councillor Cross. Substitute members. This is agenda item number 2. Councillor Hoy will be substituting for Councillor Lambourne. And Councillor Cross for Councillor Sharp. Thank you. Agenda item 3, non-members attending. We have present tonight Councillor Sparing, Councillor Williams, Councillor FD, Councillor Rowe and Councillor Wotton. Can't see any other members. No, that's it, thank you. Sorry? Oh, Councillor Cripps. Apologies there, Councillor Cripps, didn't see you. Agenda item 4, minutes of the meeting held on the 23rd of February and also on the 1st of March 2023. Members, are the minutes approved, please? Anybody want to agree those minutes or indicate? Thank you. Agenda item 5, to receive declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest, please, members? No one's indicating, thank you. Agenda item 6, free 3-hour parking for blue badge holders. Members, councillors James Newport, John Mason and Adrian Eves called in the portfolio holder decision relating to the free 3-hour parking for blue badge holders. Councillor Newport, first of all, can I invite you to outline your reasons for calling in the decision?
Thank you, Chairman. We called this in to scrutinise the due diligence of the proposed scheme and to look at if there were indeed any budgetary implications.
Thank you, Councillor Newport. Councillors Mason and Councillor Eves, would you like to add anything to that? Thank you, Councillor Mason.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I would like to know whether there's, in due diligence, whether there's any data behind the choices that have been made and the policy put forward.
Thank you. Councillor Eves?
I think my main concerns was around why the decision was on 3 hours, and as Councillor Newport has said, on the costings, budgetary effect on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I ask the portfolio holder, Councillor Sparing, and the Director for Assets and Investment, Phoebe Barnes, if they would like to respond to the points that have been raised?
Thank you, Chairman. I'll start off, and if I need some support, Ms Barnes, I'm sure will support me. Earlier this year, Ms Barnes and myself were approached by a disabled organisation, reputable organisation, suggesting that perhaps we should review our parking policy for disabled parkers. We did this. We went through all of the district councils in Essex and found that we were one of two, the other being Braintree, that were the only ones that charged. We felt that potentially this was not a very good PR situation for this council, and as such looked to address the situation to put us in line with most of the, or all the other councils except Braintree. The options facing us were in line with the majority of other councils who use 3 hours free parking, or to go to all-day parking, or free parking indefinitely, whichever phrase you want to use. It was very close to budget time. Having liaised on several occasions over several months with officers regarding the financial implications of any decision like this, we have come to the conclusion it is almost impossible to ascertain accurately the financial implications, because people with disabled parking facilities, i.e. the blue badge, can park in any of our bays across the district. They not only can use their own disabled bays, but they can pick up anywhere else as long as they have their blue badge showing. Currently, they pay for whatever time they park, and they are entitled to an additional free hour at the end of that. Our view was we needed to take some action to make us align with other councils in the county, that 3 hours was probably the most sensible approach to take. The financial implications would be kept to the minimum. If in the fullness of time, council feels that it wants to go to free parking, unlimited free parking, that would, I feel, be a council decision, because the financial implications would be substantially greater. It would also create a possible situation whereby disabled parkers could go into any bay for as long as they like. They could go to London, they could do whatever they like, and it would restrict the use of the parking for other non-disabled people. It would also have a knock-on effect on the financial implications. That, I think, with the support of officers, we've done all the due diligence as far as we are able. We have kept the financial implications to a minimum, and we have, in my view, put this council in line with every other council in one way or another across the county, except Braintree. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Does the officer, Phoebe, would you like to add anything to that?
Nothing further to add, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll now go to members for questions. Councillor Newport.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a few questions. So, is there any indication of how many blue badge holders there are in the district? How many disabled spaces are in council-owned car parks? Because I couldn't find that figure. What is the availability or the impact on disabled spaces? Now, Councillor Sperring, I think I just heard you say they can park in any space, not just disabled spaces?
That is correct, providing they're showing their blue badge.
Okay. What other options were considered? Because there are other options rather than free parking versus 3 hour free parking. and I think you've covered the financial impact. But when considering the financial impact, was a survey considered of the usage in the car parks of disabled, so you could do a rough calculation of blue badge holders? Thanks.
I'll have the first crack if you like. We don't know how many disabled people are coming. The number of parking blue badges in this district is almost immaterial. Other people from all over the county can come here, and providing they've got a blue badge, they qualify for the same conditions as our residents. Now, I would suggest that in light of, shall we say, the banking fraternity, which is eminent in this town, disabled people will come to Rayleigh if they want to go to their banks or their building societies, and they will park. We've seen the fact that Rayleigh has stayed fairly vibrant through all the doom and gloom over the last few months and years. People keep coming here. To work out how many disabled people will come here, I think, is almost impossible. To work out the finances of how often it is, it effectively means that somebody's going to have to stand in every car park counting hour after hour. I'm sorry, Councillor Newport, it's just not feasible. We have gone down a road where we feel that we are complying and meeting the obligations that every other council takes. Personally, I think we have reached a reasonable compromise. No, we can't do a survey on every aspect of this. Somewhere along the line, we have to assume that this is the right course of action. It's beneficial for our disabled residents. It meets us in line with most of the other councils across the country, across the county. And, you know, if District Council wants to change my view and my policy in years to come, I have no problem with that whatsoever. But I think the implications financially and by blocking up bays will have to be taken into consideration.
Thank you. Did you want to come back at all, Councillor Newport? Any other members? Councillor Mr Mason.
Thank you, Chairman. Was the question asked of the councils that had chosen 3 hours, why they chose 3 hours, and of those who decided to do all day, why they chose all day?
Thank you, Councillor Mason.
No, we didn't do that, Councillor Mason. We took an approach that we felt was going to have the minimum financial impact on the council. Budgets were just about to be done. We felt that this course of action would produce the minimum amount of financial impact. We felt that we would then be in line with most of the other councils in the county. As I've said, if in the fullness of time, full council wants to review this period and extend it, then that, I feel, is a council decision, because the financial implications will be considerably more. But having spoken to officers who have been involved in this situation of funding and receiving money in car parks over many years, they cannot come up with a plan or a survey that would work out what the financial implication would be to extend 3 hours to free parking for disabled. I have asked that question and they have no idea how they would do it. Thank you.
Could I ask my second question, Chairman?
Yes, of course you can.
The second question would be, and I may have missed this, so excuse me if I have, was any consultation made with any disabled bodies and organisations which support the disabled, and what their opinion was on the suggestion, and more particularly now, the implementation that has been put forward?
We liaised with the organisation that contacted us initially, but as I keep saying, we were close to budget time. We were going in line with the majority of the other councils in this county. The financial implication was kept to a minimum. If council wants to make it longer, fine. I have absolutely no problem with that. But I felt that to take this modest step forward to make sure that we weren't held up as one of the 2 councils in the county that charged disabled, this was the right route to go. It was minimum impact on our finances, and we got in my view, took the council out of a possible PR situation where everybody would have played on the fact that we were charging disabled.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs Gatestone.
Hello. I'd just like to say that I support this initiative. It's really I'm really pleased to see that we are offering 3-hour free parking. The objective of a blue badge is to make sure there's easy access for people with disability to use facilities, shops, banks, etc. I think the 3-hour policy does do this, and it brings us into line with many other councils. I do fear that going to a full free parking charge, many people that have disabilities do work, or it could cause long-term blocking of car parks, especially for those near train stations, etc. So I think this is a really good compromise.
Thank you. Councillor Mr Myers, and if we can keep it to questions, there's a recommendations.
Yeah, no problem. Very quick question. You said it was a list of all the neighbouring councils, but the only one that's missing is Castle Point. I just wonder why that was missing.
But we never got a response from them, Councillor. We did ask the question. As you can see, we've got a response from everybody else, but we never ever got a response from, and we've even asked this week about it, and we've never got a response.
Thank you. Councillor Cross.
Thank you, Chairman. How many disabled drivers were asked whether 3 hours was sufficient or not?
We didn't ask any disabled drivers. The decision was based on financial commitment. I'm pretty sure that if we'd have asked most disabled drivers, they would have said all day. I don't know. We tried to put something in place that we felt was a compromise that would get us in line with all the other councils. If, as I keep saying, council wants to review this, make a bigger survey, go down the road, then I feel that should be done at full council level. This, in my view, is an interim step.
Did you want to come back on that, Councillor?
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I think an input from disabled drivers would have been helpful. I think many of them would have said half an hour or 1 hour might be acceptable to them. Unless you ask, you don't know.
I would suggest that half an hour would not be acceptable. That's my feeling. We haven't, as I say, gone down that road. We were trying to do something that we could bring in short term to ensure that we complied with the rest of the county effectively.
Thank you. Councillor Hoy.
Thank you. I've forgotten my first question, but hopefully I'll remember it by the time I get to the end. I'm going to start with equality and diversity implications. I'm quite astonished that we have found that there will be no impacts, either positive or negative, with this policy. I can't see how this has been done properly, this report, if we've come to that conclusion. I would, without doing a report myself or an assessment myself, I would assume there would be some positive impacts. And I think if we'd done a proper impact assessment, as we should do, because that's our policy, as Councillor Cross said, we'd perhaps have a bit more information about what disabled drivers might want. So I'm quite astonished that's not been done, and I think the report is flawed just on that basis. On the second point, Southend, free all-day parking with blue badge. That's just for Southend residents. I have checked this, so unless that's changed. Councillor Newport is shaking his head because this was their policy, because they used to issue their own blue badges, as I understand it. So if that's changed, that's fine. And the final question, which I've lost, and as I've lost it, that's my fault. So I'll have to leave it there. Thank you.
I see no other members indicating.
Can I just come back there, Chairman?
Yes.
On Councillor Hoy's comment, I keep saying this was an interim, in my view, this is an interim step. If we had not done anything, if we'd had gone through as all the procedures and contacts and one thing and another, our disabled residents and visitors would be waiting for potentially months for us to come back with this conclusion. This, I believe, is the right step we should have taken. We are now in line with the other councils, the majority of other councils in the county, and I believe that is the right move.
Thank you. Right, I've got a couple of... yes, of course you can, Councillor Hoy.
But this goes back to my original point. I keep asking these questions on all our reports, and I'm getting really fed up with it, and I'm sure everyone else is getting fed up with me asking these questions. If that was the case, Councillor Sperring, surely that should have been in the equality and diversity implications part of the report, to say that's why we haven't done one,
Yes.
and that we're looking to do it in the future. I mean, I think that's the very least we should be doing.
Thank you. Now, I've got a couple of questions myself. First of all, I was a little concerned when, Councillor Sperring, you mentioned that this was seen as a PR reason when you mentioned that at the start. That concerned me a little bit. Talking about some research into how much blue badge holders use free parking in other districts, I do think you could have found some comparable measures, even if it was similar like-for-like numbers of people within that district who are blue badge owners. So that would have been quite interesting to actually have fed into this for the costings. You mentioned that this is in line with the majority of the other councils in Essex, but that doesn't relate to the table that is on page 6.4, because there's 5 district councils that also do the 3 hours with blue badge holders, and yet six offer free all-day parking. So we're not in line with the majority of other councils, just to make that clear. I couldn't see in the report where it says that it's an interim step. So that's quite interesting to know, and I don't know how, as a committee, we feel that that could be, well, at least minuted that this is an interim, and perhaps ask for it to come back to the committee. And I think that is mine covered. Thank you.
If I may, Chairman, the last point, interim, that's my view on things. As the portfolio holder, I have made the decision that this is the route we should take at the moment. As I keep saying, if full council wants to take on all-day free parking and the financial implications that will take, I believe that is a full council decision, not a portfolio holder decision. When I say PR, I would have suggested, I don't quite know what other phrase I could have used, but if we continued not and have been made aware, as we were by officers, that we were one of 2 councils who were charging, I don't think that would have gone down very well with most of the councillors sitting round here. They would have been saying we should be doing something about it. Well, I did something about it, and I took what I thought was the appropriate step. And as I say, if it's my view as an interim, you may want to keep it as 3 hours, but you may wish to change it in the fullness of time. But I don't think it would have been appropriate for me, as the portfolio holder, to take on anything more than 3 hours. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it, if I just come back on those comments, I think it's quite difficult to actually decide whether it should be 3 hours or a whole day without any actual financial report to demonstrate the cost to the council. Councillor Mrs Newport.
Can you tell me what organisation you spoke with. You said you spoke with a disabled organisation.
I'll pass that one over to Ms Barnes.
And
Can you
I've got
remember?
a second question. Do you want me to ask that now? And my second question is, how will you know when the disabled parking time starts? What method are we going to use? They're going to park for 3 hours, but how are we going to know what time they park there?
We would suggest that we will put this out in a press release, that they put it on their blue badge when they arrive.
Like the clock?
Like the clock.
Shall we come back to you? Yeah. Councillor Mason, in the meantime, you've got a question.
No.
Ah, sorry.
No, I've got a recommendation.
Ah, lovely.
Because I
thank
think
you.
we got to a point where I felt that it was reasonable to bring recommendations forward.
Yep, thank you, Mr Mason.
I would like to put forward a recommendation that the Overview and Scrutiny Committee note the interim decision of the portfolio holder and ask for a full report considering other alternatives and options to be brought to full council as soon as possible. I'm happy to take officers' advice as to what time period should be put on that.
Thank you. I would second that. So we've got that recommendation. We'll take the vote on that now, I guess. Yeah. So we're going to take a vote on that recommendation from Councillor Mason. Those in favour? Those against? And those abstaining? That motion is carried. Phoebe, did you have the answer there, please?
Yep, so we was contacted by a Lord Peter William Brown, who was working alongside with Southend Access Group and Southend Council on their changes to their blue badge disabled parking.
So we consulted with an organisation not representing our district.
It came that question came to us, which started the conversation around what, as a council, and what we do compared to other authorities, what we do for blue badge holders in our district.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs Newport, did you want to come back on that at all?
Sorry, can you just clarify? So that was Lord Peter William Brown from Southend Council, is that what you said?
He's an individual, but he had worked and started the conversations with Southend Council and the Live Well Group, the Access Group, on how they changed their blue badge scheme.
Okay.
And had really consulted and asked for it. I believe he's a resident in this area.
Okay.
Had originally wanted the proposed full-day parking, but with the but working with the portfolio holder.
From the Live Well organisation?
Yeah, that works with the Access Group as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? I can see nobody indicating. So we've made one recommendation. Would you like to hear that again and at all? No? Looks. Yep. Brilliant. Wonderful. So the rest of the report is just for noting. Yes. Okay. Thank you very much, members. Agenda item 7. Rochester District Council's volunteer policy. For this one, members, Councillor Mrs Goodin, Councillor Adrian Eves and Councillor James Newport have called in the portfolio holder decision relating to the Rochester District Council volunteer policy. Councillor Mrs Goodin, can I invite you to outline your reasons for calling the decision?
Good evening, Chairman. Volunteers give up their time keeping our streets and open spaces clear of rubbish for years with the support of RDC. the policy doesn't give clarity on how the element of this document will be working with volunteers doing such work regarding the litter picking and so forth. And in other councils, I've noted that there are fines for people picking litter up, and I think that we need some clarity on how this policy would work in Rochford District.
Thank you. Councillor East, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think one of the things that I was a little bit concerned about, I read through your report through twice, and it wasn't clear who it was actually directed at or who would come under it. For instance, we've got a situation where we have the community grants that are annually awarded to voluntary groups, charities that are associated with the council. Does it apply to them? Does it apply to people who do charity work who are employed by the council? It's quite unclear as to who this actually applies to. So I think that would be something that I would be looking to. I won't raise a recommendation now, but I'll be looking for a recommendation on clarity on that.
Thank you. And Councillor Newport, do you have anything to add? Okay, thank you. Can I now ask the portfolio holder, Councillor Sperring, and the Director for Environment, Marcus Houghton, if they would like to respond to the points that have been raised?
Thank you, Chairman. We, as RDC on the environment area, have wanted to put a policy and have been encouraged to try and put a volunteers policy together for some while. Sadly, we haven't had the resources, and in my view, this is long overdue, and we have now achieved it. The policy has been instigated following various conversations with insurers, our own HR department, our legal department, the Travellers Unit. We've used the experience of other councils, we've used our own officers. We're trying to make this very clear. We are not, repeat, not trying to dissuade volunteers. But if we are forming a support group, whatever that be, with the name of Rochford District Council behind it, we need to have a policy. We have been told by all these parties that we must put a policy in place. If it is a volunteer group that is not operating under the auspices of Rochford District Council, then they will carry on operating as they do. We will continue to work with them, to support them, but if it is something that RDC instigates, then this is the policy that must be in place. I'll pass over to Mr. Houghton now in case he's got any information.
Yeah, thank you. I think for clarity, I think what started is we had a couple of ex-employees who are quite keen to come back and give their time to the council, but that's in almost a sort of voluntary employed situation, if that makes sense. So wanting to do things such as perhaps even meet with contractors, get us quotes, go out and do some inspections for us, and do meaningful work, and perhaps even use work vehicles to do so. So these are posts which we just couldn't let them loose. There has to be some sort of policy in place. We've got to ensure that now council policies are all there already to underpin that, but it just needs a volunteer policy to refer to. So there's a volunteer policy. And essentially what it says is if you're going to be working in a sort of voluntary capacity for the Rochford Council, then the policies of this council still apply to you. And it's as simple as that. And it's more about, again, as Councillor Springs was alluded to, is to ensure that they are covered by our insurance purposes as well. But it's not to for existing work parties that are sort of under their own steam. This does not apply. It's if Rochford Council decides to want to actually engage someone to do some work in a voluntary capacity with a policy to do so. And it is what it's about. So it's an internal document. It does say internal on there, so it applies to Rochford managers to say, if you're going to go down this route, you've got to consider this first. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Milne.
Thank you, Chairman. And thanks for that clarity on that, because I think many of us were assuming that we're looking at litter pickers and things like that. Because there might be some, have you considered though that having some structure around anyone who does any kind of volunteering in the community, admittedly they're not in terms of being strictly a Rochford employee or even a volunteered one, but we can have a problem where somebody does something and they don't know how to pick something up properly and all of that and do their back in and all the rest of it. Because if we regularised this kind of approach and had a proper policy across all types of volunteers, or define them into two groups, one is corporate, the other one's public. And because at the moment, I think if you were doing something and then something happened, it could be hard luck, you know. You see where I'm coming from there. This does actually have a good look about the structure of it, I have to say. But I'm just looking at the concerns of volunteers per se, but defining two groups of them. And I don't know if the insurance company would like that either. I mean, that's the other side. Thank you.
Sorry, so for clarity, for example, at present, if we had something like the Essex Wildlife Trust undertake some voluntary work on a country park, we would still expect to see risk assessments in advance anyway, and even volunteer groups, we would provide a risk assessment as guidance. So there's still some management of risk there, and that's just our duty of care. So we'd undertake that anyway. But this is really very much about if we wanted to engage, have actual volunteers actively working and answering to Rochford Council directly, then really we need a policy in place to ensure they're acting as we'd expect staff to behave. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members indicating to speak? Oh, sorry, Councillor Hoy.
Thank you, Chairman. The concern I've got is around whether or not this document is helping replace people who maybe otherwise have been paid to do the work with volunteers. I do notice, however, that all the pictures on each of the documents do show people planting trees, which might suggest otherwise, and it goes back to what you were saying just earlier, but I want some assurances around that, please.
I can assure you that all the photos of people planting trees are volunteers, but would have to have had, as of now, would come under our requirements. But, you know, we're not trying to, let's make this very clear, we are not trying to dissuade volunteers. We are just trying to ensure that if anybody is being done working with RDC, we and they know what the parameters are within their work permit.
So if I may come back, the question was actually, can I have assurances that we're not replacing roles which would otherwise be paid with volunteers?
So the answer is yes, I can give you that assurance. I mean, as a council, you know that we only really fund core activity anyway, really. So, you know, I wouldn't want to plan core activity with a resource that you can't be certain of. So, you know, in that sense, you know, the funding cannot be reduced. We're not seeking to use volunteers to somehow reduce the base of our resourcing. That wouldn't be correct. But I think if you can build on that, if there's some addition, then of course we'll take that. But in terms of resourcing, no, we couldn't plan it that way. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mason.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got two questions, if I may. The first is to ask, in response to the description of what this policy might be applied to, is to ask whether there's a programme coming forward which would give shape and real direction and implementation to where it would be used. These are just suggestions. And in the second question would be to say, I've heard this is necessary because of insurance. Has this impacted upon the council's insurance premium?
I think I'll answer the first bit, if I may. We have recently engaged a park ranger who has proved to be very successful. Part of her remit is to encourage support groups Friends of Hockley Woods, Friends of Cherry Orchard Country Park. And this is what we're trying to ensure, that if these groups are supporting RDC, then they will be fully covered. It's not a question, as Councillor Hoy has said, this is not a question of volunteers replacing paid staff. There is quite a marked difference in what each party is responsible for. And I'll let you go on for the...
So the answer is no, there's no increase in premium. And the idea is that they are complying with policies as we'd expect a paid employee to do so. So that, there shouldn't be additional risk. So they're inducted in the same way and expected to follow the same risk assessments when they're undertaking tasks.
I'm not sure I got an answer to my question. I asked if there was a programme coming forward to show us, show council, show members exactly how this policy will be enabling in particular subjects and areas and focus of volunteering. There's no point in putting a policy in place, and there's no good members approving it if there isn't something very positive in its form of a programme to actually see and celebrate.
No, of course. So sorry, I can answer that as well. So, I mean, yes, there is something planned. There are certain posts that we look to be putting forward. And again, we had ex-officers very keen to get involved. So there were posts that we plan to put forward to advertise, say these are ones, volunteer posts that people are wishing to engage with. And in terms of sort of schedule of work parties, again, that's something we plan to be putting together once this is in place.
So on to your question, Councillor Mason.
Yes, Chairman, I just look forward to seeing a report showing me a programme and showing me what it's for, and to see a follow-up on the benefit that was obtained. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Reeves.
Thank you, Chair. I don't think anyone here in their right mind would say that we don't need this volunteer policy, so that's one of the things that needs to be said first off. But I'll go back to my first point. I think actually in what we've got in the document, I don't think it's clear on who it's actually aimed at. And I think I'd like to make a recommendation that clarity is given on who this actually relates to. Although I've heard what you've said tonight, I thank you for that. It's not reflected in what I've read in the report. Thank you.
I'm happy to put a sort of, it's like a front page that states that a bit more clearly. I think if you take it in the round, that it does hint it's an internal policy, but I think we can put something a bit more clear on the front page. I do take your point. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Newport.
Thank you, Chairman. I was just taking a glance at the recruitment of volunteers, and I wondered how this part of the policy will apply to, Councillor Sperring said, Friends of Cherry Orchard, because within that, I think you did reference them and said that this volunteer policy would apply to that group. So within their group, am I right? Am I going down? So within their group, how would this apply if they had volunteers who were under 18? Because this policy says persons are required to be 18 years or over to participate. So would the council then say, hang on a minute, within your group you've got under 18s, sorry, you can't volunteer for us anymore? And how would the DBS checks apply to these groups? Would the council then be saying that their volunteer groups would be paid for by the council to have DBS checks, bearing in mind some of these groups can be very fluid, and how much would that actually end up costing, and how hard is that going to be to administer? Because I think that whereas obviously we all welcome the safeguarding of children, in practicalities of that, I don't see how that can be administered very well by the council unless you're going to check who they've got in their group every time. Because we could blindly be saying, oh, we paid for them to be DBS checked, but that group might have changed on the next time they volunteer. So I do worry about that aspect. We've got DBS checks in there. If we're going to make reference to them, we need to make sure that we can follow through as a council our responsibilities to those that are volunteering. And how is that going to look like? You know, how are you going to check? Because the buck's going to ultimately, if they're signed up to this volunteer policy, the buck's going to be stopping with us. So I'm very concerned about that aspect.
I mean, irrespective of the policy, the buck would stop with us anyway if we're encouraging them to undertake works on our sites. Hence, a policy gives you a more robust position than without. So, I mean, it is. I mean, you know, so you would expect in those situations DBS checks to be undertaken. I mean, you would require those to be undertaken. If, you know, and existing policy would require that to be the case as well. So if you had a group that were working with minors on our sites, then you'd expect them to have the policies in place to do so.
And sorry, Marcus, how are you going to administer making sure that if you've got this in black and white, it says here to anyone that's looking at this policy, I know you said it's internal, but we all know, sat around this table, that we're expecting these DBS checks to be taken. How are we going to make sure they have been taken and they're current? Who's going to administer that? Where does the buck stop with that?
So if we're engaging someone in a volunteer capacity to work for us, then we would undertake those DBS checks. We wouldn't let someone loose with a work party in that situation.
And my point about if that group, whatever group it is, the volunteer group, have under 18s in that group, are they allowed to volunteer or are they not allowed to volunteer? Do we exclude the under 18s or the under 18s allowed to work in that group? Where does that, it's a bit murky to me.
I mean, obviously the policy can make clear if you wish, but I mean, in terms of work parties, then what I'd expect is that obviously under supervision, we can take on under 18s for specific tasks. But this is more about wider volunteering, so this is allowing someone to act as a member of staff. But under, you know, you can have under 18s under close supervision with a suitable adult, and again, depending on the risk assessments as to what tasks they can undertake. But clearly they're limited in what they can underdo.
Mike, sorry.
Could we just have that clarified within the document, that that's the position? That would just help.
Absolutely, yeah, more than happy to sort of put a sort of paragraph on that in there. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs Goodin.
Actually, it was quite similar to what your Councillor Newport has just raised, but what would be the volunteer management skills and the costs and the expenses and the recompense? Do RDC also have the manpower to actually manage the volunteers? Because one ranger, if there's something going on at Cherry Orchard and something going on at Hockley, is there the manpower to actually manage this, which really links in with what Councillor Newport was raising?
I think the gist I'm hearing is this is all very negative as far as I can hear. We are trying to put this policy in place. We will do our utmost to make sure that it is administered correctly by our officers. We appreciate there will be additional work. We understand that, and we will try to do our utmost to ensure that we comply with all the legislation that is applicable for this council.
Thank you, Councillor Goodin. Okay, I can see no other members indicating. I'll just come in. Just firstly to correct you on one thing, Councillor Spearing. I don't think there is any negativity here. In fact, I heard Councillor Reeves compliment on the fact that this council is now developing a volunteering scheme. I think what we do hear here is that this paper that's been presented to us is not as good as we would hope to see. And I will highlight a couple of issues myself. Now, you mentioned that previously we have not had the resources. You've mentioned a ranger. As Councillor Mrs Goodin's just highlighted, managing and that is managing volunteers, managing risk assessments, managing that the DBSs are in check where applicable, managing the whole organisation's timings, the training, cannot possibly fall to one ranger. So if you could, one, clarify who else is part of this scheme. Our officer mentioned that at the moment it's ex-staff returning to help out. We've asked for some clarity already in the programme of these volunteering roles, and it would be interesting to see how these are going to be. It mentions a few websites, but how these will be promoted to the general public. Again, Councillor Sparing, you say you're not trying to dissuade volunteers, but one thing that I've picked up is in the guide for volunteers on page 7.16, under recompense, the second sentence says, the council will not provide out-of-pocket expenses. It goes on to state only in unique circumstances. Yet on page 3 of the volunteer agreement under expectations, it says the reimbursement of agreed expenses. So those two statements themselves are confusing. So when you say this committee is, you feel negativity, there is not. We just want to get some clarity. And this point especially concerns me because it is good practice to offer expenses, out-of-pocket expenses to volunteers. If we do not, then we are actually creating a barrier for some people who would like to volunteer but cannot afford to volunteer. So if you could answer some questions on why there is the confusion around the out-of-pocket expenses. Just a couple of other, two more questions to be answered. Cherry Orchard, the Friends of Cherry Orchard group, unless anybody wants to correct me that I'm wrong, have their own policies, practices and insurance in place. Therefore, if we then took over that group, not only would it be duplication, confusion, but also double accounting. In fact, we would be looking after them when they're already looking after themselves, and rather well, actually. And lastly, DBS checks. It would be interesting to know, again, this is only for clarity, no negativity about our council embracing volunteering, but who would be DBS checked? Because you need to be very careful on the role and what they are actually doing before you actually DBS somebody. Thank you.
Chairman, thank you. A couple of points. When I said about the highway ranger and our resources, it was the highway ranger that was able to, because of the additional resource, was able to spend time to put this report and this volunteer policy together. When I talk about negativity, it's along the lines that while I appreciate what Councillor Eaves has said, everything else that has been raised at us is assuming that everything, it seems to me, is going to go wrong. The thing is not up and running yet. When we get it up and running, and there will no doubt be, as we found in every other thing, little bumps in the road, we will need to address them. We're not being negative that there won't be some bumps in the road, but let's be positive. This is a policy. We will do everything within our power with our officers to make sure that the policy is enforced, and we do everything to make sure that both our residents and this council is doing the right thing and is protected accordingly. I'll pass to Mr. Houghton in case you've got anything.
Sorry, the question around clarity over the out-of-pocket expenses wasn't covered.
Thank you. So I think just from experience of out-of-pocket, it's to ensure there's some clarity. It's better to have that statement rather than to say, well, we might pay back. It's just that I think of events in the past where volunteers have gone off and bought things thinking it's a good idea to do so, and then expecting recompense from the council. Or, you know, I think an extreme example was the hire of a marquee for an event. You know, and there was a perfectly good procurement policy, in sense. So this is past experiences of working across other authorities that without the policy in place at the start to set the parameters, that sometimes people can start off with good intentions for things that actually we then find very hard to recompense. So it's better to have, I think, a very firm stance on this at the start, rather than saying, well, we may or may not do so.
Okay, just to say, rather than you try the policy out and see how it goes, if we get things right from the start, and that is all this committee is recommending, something as simple as out-of-pocket expenses can explain exactly what you would pay. You would expect to pay somebody's travelling expenses by bus to be able to come and volunteer. If they are you're shaking your head, Councillor, Mrs. Gadsden, this is good practice from Volunteer in England, which most volunteer engaging organisations would follow. And one of them being the very simple fact that if somebody volunteers with you all day, you would expect to be able to pay for some refreshments for them.
Not all volunteers. I volunteer in many levels, and I do not expect, if it's offered, it's available, I still refuse it. But I'm saying it shouldn't be a compulsory thing. Many organisations cannot afford to pay. I've litter picked with Councillor Julie Goodin. I've made my own way there, and I've never expected. So I think it can't be a condition of volunteering.
Councillor Mrs. Gadsden, when we're looking at making this accessible for anyone to volunteer, we need to be able to offer out-of-pocket expenses. Not all people can afford to volunteer. Thank you. Any other members? Thank you. So, we have two choices for the committee. If you've got any outstanding concerns about the decision that has been made, it can either be, one, refer the matter back to the portfolio holder and should confirm for the meeting to record the nature of those concerns. This can also include a recommendation to the portfolio holder from the committee, or simply refer the matter direct to the next full council, also setting out the nature of the concerns. I think we've raised some concerns for the portfolio holder to take back from this meeting. Does everybody agree with that? Yeah, thank you.
Item, please. Item 7, page 7.4, it says that the existing ad hoc informal arrangement is continued. I did speak with the Open Spaces officer, and he assured me that there would be no stopping the existing ad hoc informal arrangements. Is that an either or?
No, they'll continue as they are now. I said if the policy was never about that, it's about more of a different level of recruiting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, members. That's item 7 covered. If you would like to go, thank you. Thank you very much, Councillor Sperring. Marcus, yeah. Thank you. Agenda item 8, members, information bulletin, freight house and office accommodation for Rochford District Council staff. The Council's Director of Assets and Investment, Phoebe Barnes, will introduce this report.
Thank you, Chair. So this is an information bulletin from myself as an officer, and therefore is not an update from any member or portfolio holder. At the request of members and the chairman of Overview and Scrutiny Committee, an information bulletin was asked to be presented tonight on where we are regarding the freight house and office accommodation from staff. So the overview is that we are looking at options around the freight house that is within the asset development programme. We we know as a management team that South Street offices are not fit for purpose for staff and staff wellbeing. It doesn't create opportunity for collaboration with staff and departments with each other. There's quite a lot of silo working, and since coming out of the pandemic, it's been highlighted even more so because staff are balancing working from home and coming into the office. Where we are with Freight House is that we are looking at the options around how we can convert that into office accommodation, as it has been highlighted as the asset that we want to move out of South Street, unlock the residential development along South Street and move staff into a fit for purpose office, open plan office. At this point in time, there's no decision as yet I can bring forward to members to make around Freight House or the South Street move, because we're still working on that information, on gathering all that data, on gathering all the financials, on developing a business plan to then be presented in front of members to make a decision to move forward with the options around what we can deliver. So that's what the information bulletin kind of concludes on, is that that's where we are in this point in time on Freight House and the move from South Street.
Thank you, Phoebe. Members, any questions? Councillor Mr Eaves.
Thank you, Chair. On page 8.2 of the document that we've been given, under current situation, the third paragraph, with this in mind, the Council has currently commissioned a review of the Freight House. Can we know who's been commissioned for that? Because obviously with GB still involved in the background, this is a bit of a contractual concern.
Yep, so we have commissioned a company, Hampton Barron Smith, who have been commissioned by the council outside of the contract with GB. GB has put a proposal forward of what the council originally wanted before we went into the pandemic, which was an extension to Freight House and a bigger office space. GB are aware that we are working on options of what we can do to have them conversations with them. We are being very open and transparent within GB Partnership and the contract we have with them. The contract with GB Partnership around Freight House is that they would develop the Freight House, and it wasn't and the council would fund all that cost. So there's no profit in for GB in that development of the Freight House. It was as part of the whole asset delivery programme. It was just part of the contract with them. So we are just working with Hampton Barron Smith as a company to look at options of what we can do as a council to bring them options to the table with GB.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Eaves?
Kind of. Without actually seeing the contracts, I must admit I am a little bit wary, because it does kind of seem to, I don't know, it conflicts with things we've been told before, with the depth of the contract we've got with GB. Obviously, they were very involved with the design of the reworking of the Freight House. Now they're not. So, you know, I obviously, you know the contract better than I do, but it does actually raise a good deal of concern, let's say.
Councillor Councillor Mrs Goodin.
Sorry, Phoebe, I didn't quite catch the people that you said was commissioned by.
Hampton Barron Smith.
Hampton.
I think it was Hanson Barron Smith. Is that correct? Yeah.
Is that two R's?
Did you have a question?
Yeah. So there are staff that are being asked to spring clean their desks in time. I'm just wondering, where are the staff expecting to go, and how is it going to be managed if Freight House isn't currently ready and awaiting staff? And is it actually going to be fit for purpose at Freight House with such a limited amount of space?
So we asked staff to kind of spring clean the office anyway, whether we was moving or not. One, for kind of health and safety reasons. There's a lot of documentation that's starting to build up, and that we would expect staff to keep areas clean and tidy. But yes, we've been asking staff to spring clean to get ready for a move out of South Street. The option is that because of Freight House won't be at a specification that is fit for purpose for staff as it is, and work will need to be done on that site. But at the same time, we don't want staff staying in South Street in the state that South Street is as well. We are looking at options of, if we can, within kind of existing budgets and resources, again, working on that business case, if we can move out temporarily to make that culture change of moving out into a more open plan office, so rented accommodation. We're still within the district, still within Rochford, to create that culture change, to create staff kind of collaborating, working together, departments cross-working together and supporting each other, and to begin that step. So then from that, they would then move into a fit-for-purpose office at Freight House.
Did you want to come back?
Yes, please. It does concern me that we are looking to rent accommodation again when we've already spent the past couple of years renting the school, when we have buildings around that we are disposing of, that we are now looking to rent more accommodation when staff are already in a situation. Yes, we accept that it may not be fit for purpose where they are now, but to put more costs on the public purse just doesn't make any sense.
Okay. Councillor Mr Mason.
Thank you, Chair. I have... Hello? Oh, I'm here now. Sorry, you're really lucky. I've got a number of questions, if I may. If I put them just, I won't throw them all out at once. I was alarmed to read that the South Street conglomeration of buildings is not fit for purpose, because that's the first I've heard of that in any form. When was that diagnosis and implication discovered? Because the council has been in South Street for at least as long as I can remember, and as long as I've been on the council, which is now 20 years. So I'm just a little confused as to how a conclusion of not fit for purpose arises so suddenly when we have that history. So that's my first question.
So, obviously, since I've become into this position and reviewing it, the South Street offices need a considerable amount of investment in them. Comparing South Street offices of what current staff work into compared to other authorities within Essex and their office accommodation, it's comparably, their offices are comparably better than the ones at South Street. The ones at South Street, it's like a rabbit warren, really. There are houses that have been converted into offices. As I said before, there's a lot of silo working, a lot of departments sit very far from each other. There's risk that actually if someone was to fall ill within one of them offices, we wouldn't know about it until someone was to go and visit into that office. So from a working perspective, coming out of the pandemic, them offices, I would say, were no longer fit for purpose because there's not the number of staff in the site anymore.
Would you like to come back, Councillor Mason?
Yes, I would, and I've also got other questions which pertain to the update and bulletin. So it was okay before the pandemic, and it's not after the pandemic, because we now have a lower density of staff in the building, and so therefore that has led to not fit for purpose. Is that correct? Have I understood?
Not necessarily. I would have said the offices were not fit for purpose a long time ago, but coming into my position since November, I have made that, along with the support of kind of my colleagues, that we believe as a management team that them offices are not fit for purpose for the organisation anymore. But I would suggest that they wasn't fit for purpose a long time before that.
Thank you. I regret hugely hearing about that officially or in any way for the first time in 20 years. So something's gone wrong somewhere for a long, long time. Okay, so the report helps us understand that and talks about options for moving forward. I've got to ask, where you spoke of using existing budget for consultancy, I assume, and for other purposes in preparing a report for full council, I hope, to consider the options. Is that what the £4.2 million is going to be used for? Because we allocated that in the budget, and I specifically asked at the budget what it was for. So I'm a little put out to say that I'm now learning that if that's the case, that there was a reason for it. And should this not have been declared at that time? I feel quite aggrieved that I've been asking about what's happening with regard to the ADP and Freight House for many months. And indeed, I've been in contact with yourself. And this has come forward at almost the last gasp of the municipal year. I'm quite shocked. So question is, money is needed to be spent to prepare for a report, to understand the options. That's coming out the £4.2 million, is it?
My understanding is that the 4.2 million is within the capital programme. Therefore, it would be a revenue budget we would be expecting to pay any consultancy support from. Therefore, the 4.2 million is solely for the capital programme of redevelopment purposes. So all the work that we're doing behind the scenes to bring options forward for decision and building up them business cases would be coming from an existing revenue budget.
Okay. Councillor Reeves hit on a little bit around GB partnerships and the various contracts which the council has already entered into. Clearly, well, not clearly, South Street, I'm sure, is recognised and is a subject part of that contract. Now, we've spoken about the position of the Freight House and the Freight House development in that group of contracts. So where do we stand, and what are the implications upon a change of approach surrounding the South Street properties, of which I understand planning permission has been obtained? So are there any implications if we don't go forward with that contract with regard to the South Street properties?
With regard to the whole ADP, there's a stop-go decision that is needed with the GB contract and with the GB partnership, which needs to come forward. So any decision around that would be part of the stop-go decision that would be presented. For this purpose, I was asked to give an information bulletin update on Freight House and the move out of South Street. The GB, the ADP and the bigger, wider picture of the ADP and the GB partnership would be part of a stop-go decision, which would come to a future council committee.
I'm just going to step in there just briefly, Councillor Mason, just to say we are talking on this report, so we do have to be mindful of that. Thank you.
I thought I was being mindful, Chairman, because we were talking about South Street being not fit for purpose. So I was interested in knowing where the position was on a not fit for purpose conglomeration of buildings that we're now advised we're going to get a full review and a report towards the end of April. So it was important, I thought, to ask that question.
Thank you. Councillor Mr Hoy.
Thank you, Chairman. Could I just firstly ask, is this a purely officer-led approach, and have any members of the administration or executive been involved in this or directed it in this way?
Chair, I'll answer that question if that's acceptable. And I'm just going to be very careful here because I will remind councillors that we are in the pre-election moratorium period. So I just want to be very clear with members that any politically motivated questions are not appropriate this evening. In respect of the paper in front of you today, that's very much an officer update. So there's been a request to officers to provide a factual update. That's what you have in front of you. In terms of the work that's being undertaken and the direction given around that, officers are still working to the direction given by the full council as part of the agreement of the asset delivery programme. So we are working to that direction. The work that's been undertaken in terms of reviewing the feasibility and the design of the freight house comes as a result of the fact that we are in a very different climate now compared to when the original proposals and designs were drawn up for the freight house. So this is in line with direction from the full council and also us doing our due diligence as officers to make sure that current proposals are fit for the current circumstances. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Emily.
I understand you can't answer that question. However, I will leave it there. I'll contact you directly on behalf of my group about that. Can I ask what other business cases have been looked at? None or any? In relation to both South Street, the freight house, or other business or other office accommodation which might be suitable?
So, as I said, we're still, as Emily's quite rightly pointed out, we are still working to the direction of the agreed decision of full council around the ADP and the business case. What we are looking at is options, and that business case will look at us moving out for an interim period into rented accommodation, what them costs would look like to remaining in South Street whilst the freight house is developed, what other options is there around freight. The options could be endless, but we've got to stay within the remit of what the full council recommendation was until a decision's been put forward that it is to change. But the options around staff, which is as the chief exec's vision and responsibility of the culture and what we want to deliver for staff and their well-being, one of the options is moving out to temporary accommodation to move back in. But Freight House is still the site at the moment that's going to be delivered as office accommodation.
Okay, just two more questions. Just to clarify on that last point, full council agreed the freight house with an extension, not the freight house without an extension. I'll just leave that there. That's my view. The stop-go, does it attract any penalties?
I can't answer that in detail off the top of my head without covering the kind of the full contract. But if it was a stop to it, however the contract is written, we would be presenting any penalties as part of that decision. So members would make the decision knowing whether there would be penalties or not to that decision.
Okay, and at the beginning you mentioned about, trying to find I wrote it down now, options to the table with GB partnerships. Do we consider GB partnerships viable given that they haven't filed their accounts and are overdue?
Sorry, Councillor Hoy.
That was a point made
That isn't speaking on this report.
It's referring to a direct quote made on the presentation of the report and an answer to a question.
Officers' advice?
If you don't want to, that's fine. You can listen to the recording later and then I'll expect an answer separately then on that. But it was a direct quote.
Yep. Sorry, Councillor Hoy. All members know what position we are in at this time pre-election. Thank you.
I type as I hear, and it was a quote.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Cross.
Thank you, Chairman. 3 questions. How much is the review costing us from Hanson, Barron and Smith? when is the review due back, or when do you expect it back? And how much space will remain in the freight house going forward for community use? Thank you.
I can't answer now exactly how much the review's costing. I don't have that information to hand. With regarding the community space, again, we're waiting for options to come back to us around proposals of using the existing space that's already there for the community, the hall that is already there, and either side, what options that could work with, as well as other suggestions for that site. We expect to have information back by the end of this week for us to review over the next couple of weeks.
Thank you. Can you guarantee that the community space will not reduce?
At this moment in time, because I don't have the proposals in front of me, I can't put a guarantee to that.
I think Councillor Cross, that's part of what will happen with the outcome from that.
Thank you.
Councillor Mrs Newport.
Thank you. Phoebe, if you're moving out of South Street for an interim period before moving into the freight house, how long do you expect that interim period to be, or is that just an open-ended, however long it takes?
Any proposal brought forward wouldn't be an open-ended proposal. We'd be bringing forward a proposal of the timeline we would expect staff to move out of, whether that would be 6 months or 12 months. Until we get the information back as to how long we expect the freight house to be developed and that timeline, that will inform a timeline of if we do move out, how long we would expect staff to move out, and then that would come back as an update with the report for decision.
Thank you. That answers your question. Thank you. Councillor Constable.
Can I just ask you, Phoebe, any decisions to move out into temporary offices or to move into the freight house will be brought to full council for our approval?
Yeah, to confirm that it is full council that our approval has to come from.
And just for Councillor Mason's information, the council have been talking about the South Street offices now for over 2 years. And I believe you've only been back on the council for a year, so you may not have been aware of some of the conversations that's been going on previously to you coming back on the council.
I take exception to that sort of comment. It's a personal comment. It's unacceptable to me. You should. I have been on this council for a total of 20 years.
Members.
Not two,
members.
Not one.
Members. Please, not now, thank you. Not now, thank you. Yep, in a minute, thank you. Councillor Myers. That's okay. Yep.
Hello? Right. A couple of questions, really. Do I understand that the only reason no one's in the freight house at the moment is because of the fire alarm system needs updating and it's going to cost about £20,000?
I don't think that's relevant to this, is it?
It is within the report at the moment that freight house. Yeah,
Forgive me.
I have at the moment freight house is closed due to the fire panel is not compliant with regulations, and therefore it's £20,000 minimum in order to replace it. To make it compliant.
Right, and the next part, you've said that South Street has got very few people in it at the moment. Wouldn't it make more sense in the interim to bring them together, closer together in offices adjacent to each other?
So, yep, that is the plan at the moment. We're just going through offices that are smaller and singular that we can close down to start encouraging staff to work together in the bigger offices. But just the culture and history has created areas that departments see as theirs. It's not so open plan. Some of the connect rooms are, but that is the plan, is to start closing it down to start getting staff into the bigger offices.
And the last one, you may not be able to answer, I don't know. Would the cost of rental exceed the cost of replacing the alarm? How long are you expecting to be out?
It's not yet, the length of time we're expected to be out is not been decided yet until we get the proposals around what options we have on the freight house. And the cost of the alarm is a capital investment over a revenue expense of potentially renting somewhere. And I wouldn't compare the cost of rental to the cost of the fire alarm panel, because that's about the freight house and the rental is about moving out of South Street.
The only reason because not having a clue how the rent will be, if you're talking at £50,000 to rent offices for a year or 2 years, wouldn't it be cheaper just to replace the alarm and then work around it?
This freight house is still not an acceptable standard to then move staff in, even with a fire alarm panel in it, for office space. It still would not be. I might as well keep staff in South Street.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Newport.
Thank you, Chairman. So as Emily knows, I don't have unrestricted access to South Street offices. So when, Phoebe, your definition of not fit for purpose, that I heard you say a couple of times, and Councillor Mason also was quite shocked to hear that. My first question would be, because I think you made issue of staff members maybe working in a room on their own if they had an accident. Oh dear, what's happened to them? Obviously that's concerning. So are we actually compliant with current health and safety requirements in South Street? I assume we are, and that was just a sort of, a throwaway comment in a way of that example that you gave. But when you say it's not fit for purpose, does it have rising damp and mould on the walls like some of our residents' housing in the district? Is it that bad? I'd like to know. I've not been in there. I can't see it. I've not heard staff complain about it. Has there been a staff survey? Our staff are actually saying, we can't work here. What is the justification? With my last question on the freight house closure and the fire alarm panel, one of my customers builds fire alarm panels, so I'm quite interested in these costs and where the quotes are for these costs. But what is the loss in the revenue from having it closed as well? Does that outweigh the cost of a new panel? Is that what you're saying? Is the revenue that low that it's just simply not cost effective to replace the panel? If we replace the panel, are you saying that when we redevelop the freight house, if that happens, that panel would then again have to be replaced? Is that what you're saying? So is that building then going to become bigger, smaller, that different panels needed? Because I'm sure that even if you replace the panel now, it would still be as good or minor changes could be made to that system when staff move in. So I'm a little bit confused on where's that advice come from?
So starting with the fire panel, yes, the cost of replacing the fire panel outweighs any income we've got from Freight House. Since we did open the Freight House, we had minimal bookings, no future bookings, and the bookings that we did have was for a parish council meeting, which was offered for free based on historic bookings that they've had in the past. And again, with the fire panel, because of the age of the building, the way the building's laid out, if we were to put the fire panels in, and it would need rewiring through the whole building with the sensors and everything. Therefore, any development we would do, which would potentially change the internals, we would need to rewire and reconnect back to the fire panels. So the information that I've had from our asset management team and surveyors is that it's not worth replacing the fire panel now, knowing we've got to put a whole new system in anyway when we develop the freight house. With regard to the health and safety of the offices, yes, we are compliant. Our health and safety officer goes around regularly and checks everything. It is just a risk, and it's a risk that we have to take on board with across the organisation, that we have officers in departments that are that are working from home and working in the office and that are scattered around the building. By closing some of the offices down, that's one way we're mitigating that risk by creating more hubs within the bigger office areas.
Thank you. And I've got one last member with questions, Councillor Mrs. Gadsden.
Mine's more of a proposal. I'm wondering if it would be possible, because there's new councillors here on this committee, councillors that have maybe not been in the offices for some years, whether a site visit could be arranged. Personally, being on the council now in my 3rd year, I was quite shocked at the lack of privacy in the reception area. If an interview room is taken up, I've seen people put behind a screen where I could hear conversations going on. When I've been inside, and I was quite shocked at the, I would say, rabbit warren. And I think today's world, there is a certain standard. If you want to attract quality staff, you want to create a good working environment, the building needs to be fit for purpose. And to be honest, I was quite shocked that this is a house that's been converted and is long past its sell-by date, not through maintenance, just through the composition of the building, is not fit for a modern day workforce. And I actually feel very sorry for staff if you have to go out of one building into the rain into another. If you've got a disabled person, the access isn't brilliant. And I do feel that it would be really useful for members to go along and to visit these buildings.
Thank you. Have you got a seconder for your proposal, Councillor Gadsden? Seconded by Councillor Constable. I think, unless I'm wrong, most members would have been to the offices at some time during their induction. Personally, especially having been to the old house, I rather like the environment, but then I like old things. Can we have a vote on Councillor Gadsden's proposal, please? All those in favour? All those against? Those abstaining? That proposal is lost. Councillor Mrs. Goodham, and I believe you are the last speaker on this item.
Thank you, Chair. Given all the information that we've heard so far and the outstanding business development case, which is due to come in April, and the financial impact that this will have through the changes being made, I wish to propose a motion that this meeting be deferred and heard at the first overview and scrutiny meeting after the elections to include a full report which includes the business development, the staff plan, the budget relating to the case and how it will be managed.
Just to clarify, Councillor Mrs. Goodin, I think you mean this item, not this meeting, to be deferred. It is coming to full council. I'm not sure of that date. So are you proposing a motion that we review it in its entirety before it goes to full council?
Yes, please.
Does she want to do it? Right, have you got yeah, Emily.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to offer some advice because essentially what you would be doing is deferring a piece of information. So I'm not sure that Councillor Mrs. Gooding's motion stacks up. I would advise the committee that, as Ms Barnes has previously said, before any decision is taken, that will come to full council. Full council will be the decision maker. That decision report supporting that decision will include the items that you've just mentioned, so things like the staffing arrangements, the budget, the options, etc., etc. So I feel that I understand the purpose of your suggestion, but I don't think it's necessary in the governance arrangements because it's taken care of anyway. And in terms of that timing, obviously we would hope to bring that as soon as we possibly can within the new municipal year, bearing in mind the calendar of meetings that's already been agreed. And so we'll look to do that at the earliest opportunity once we have all the information and once we can fit that into the schedule. Thank you.
Councillor Mrs Gooding, would you like to...
Given that information, I'll withdraw my deferral.
Thank you. And there are no other members indicating to ask any questions. So thank you, members. I think we've debated that item well. Moving on to agenda item number 9, the key decisions documents. So if I go through them page by page, nobody requires me to read them out in their entirety, do they? So the actual key decisions start on page 2. So page 2, has anybody got any questions? Please indicate. Councillor Mr Hoy.
Good idea.
It's getting late.
Lease of Holbridge Pavilion. Could I ask the officers to approach me, because I've been approached many times by people who want to lease or would like to use the pavilion. So if you go through local councillors, you may get some help. I had been approached by Councillor Sperring about a third party which was interested in the pavilion, possibly for a gym. I've actually spoken to that party and understand it's too small for them. I don't know if you've heard back from that. Yeah, that was that page. Thank you.
Thank you. Page 3. Anybody indicate? And then we'll move on to our final item of the evening, item 10, the work plan. You have in front of you the work plan that we have gone through for this year. If I can refer all members to turn to page 10.4, it has items to be scheduled in 2023-24. One thing I would like to propose, as it has been brought forward many times, is that the first of the 6 monthly updates on the cost of living comes to the first overview and scrutiny meeting of the new municipal year. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Mr Mason. All those in favour? That motion's carried. Thank you very much, members. Has anybody any other questions on item 10? Councillor Hoy.
This may be presumptive given that there is a potential meetings for a night, but regardless of that meeting, I would like to put on the future work plan a constructive review of the process around the summons to the Development Control Committee of the 28th of February 2023. I think it's that simple, yes.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder for that, please? Yes, of course.
Yep. A constructive review of the process around the summons to the Development Control Committee of the 28th of February 2023.
Could you use your mic, please? Thank you.
I thought that was coming before full council tomorrow.
I think you're actually... Thank you. It's P&C. Right. Our monitoring officer's just going to speak.
Chairman, I'd want to take that away and have a look and see what authority the Open and Scrutiny Committee has to do that. I'm not saying no, but I just want to be absolutely clear on that, bearing on the advice that we've received recently and the fact that there is a meeting tomorrow as well.
Councillor Hoy, did you want to come back on that?
I personally don't see why we can't have a review ourselves of the process in relation to our constitution and how that worked, and just to learn lessons from it. There was confusion amongst members, and at the very least it would be good to clear that up with a review.
I would gladly second that, and I think others may, but our monitoring officer would like to speak.
Chairman, I just want to be absolutely clear with it. That's all. I hear what members are saying, and I just want to be absolutely clear that is within the role of the Scrutiny Committee, and that it can happen. I'm not looking to stop it. I just want to be clear.
I will interject as chair here. Councillor Hoy, I noticed the review of the Constitution is actually on our work plan. Would you like to bring that forward to early in the year?
Yes, I think that would be the case anyway.
So is everybody happy with that we bring forward the review of the Constitution early in the new municipal year on the work plan? Councillor Mason.
Just one question. I mean, obviously, it depends on the progress that officers and members are able to make with regard to that piece of work on the review of the Constitution. Could we ask Ms. Ewell to comment as whether, early in the municipal year is possible?
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, we're all desperate to take that question, Councillor Mason. So as you can imagine, any review of the Constitution is a complex and lengthy activity. We have already started that activity with a cross-party working group, and some areas have already been identified for review. I am sure that we could bring an item to Overview and Scrutiny Committee early in the new municipal year, indicating what changes have already been identified that are necessary for the Constitution, and enabling a discussion at this committee about other items that you'd like to see addressed in that review. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Emily. I think that sounds absolutely agreeable to all members. I see nobody not agreeing. Good. So that brings the evening to an end. Thank you, members, for your time tonight. Thank you.